All right, guys, welcome to Unit 1.5. What are we on? A, B, C? I think it's C. I don't know, we'll find out. Unit 1.5C, positive externalities of consumption and production. But we're going to first start with production. All right, remember, in the context of the model, hopefully you guys can see this. All right, we have price, we have quantity. Remember, when we're talking about externalities, demand is equal to marginal private benefit. If there are no negative or positive consumption externalities, because the private consumers are parts of society, the marginal private benefit will then equal to marginal social benefit as well. The supply line, in the context of externalities, if you guys remember, hopefully, that supply is equal to marginal private cost, because it's the private entrepreneurs who have to incur the cost of production within the margins of output. So, if there are no negative production externalities, there's no positive production externalities, because the individual producers are a part of society, the marginal private cost will then equal marginal social cost. All right, but let's say that there are positive production externalities. What does that look like in the market? Well, before we do that, before we do that, first I forgot about the socially optimal price, and then the socially optimal quantity in the market there. But let's say we have a positive externality, a positive production externality. So what does this mean? A positive production externality is a spillover benefit. It's how the production of a product will have secondary or spillover benefits to society. So for example, we saw there are probably more examples of positive externalities during the Industrial Revolution than there might be today. Public schools, public universities, government bureaucracies over the past several decades have started to take on the responsibility of spurring innovation and incentivizing innovation. But if you think back in the Industrial Revolution, a lot of those innovations came from the private sector. So to give you a really good example of a positive production externality, it would be the Ford Motor Company. When the Ford Motor Company first started, they innovated this new mass production, industrialized assembly line technique that then other people were able to develop skills from. So when Ford set up his company, he would hire, lower entry-level workers to work on the assembly line. Well, one year he hired these two brothers, and these two brothers got a job at the Ford Motor Company. They were working on the assembly line, and they started working on transmissions, and then they gradually worked their way up to engines, and they started working on every aspect of the assembly line. Well, as a consequence of working on the assembly line for several years, these brothers developed enough expertise and enough skill in automotive mechanics that they decided to branch out and start their own business. These two brothers are known as the Dodge brothers. You might have heard of the automotive company Dodge or Chrysler, which now makes the Dodge Charger, the Camaro, and other vehicles. So you could argue that the production of Ford cars led to positive spillover effects in other markets by creating competitive vehicles with Ford. And that created new markets, it created new industries and new job opportunities. So instead of our American automotive sector being consolidated with Ford, we now have Ford, Chrysler, GM, and many others. And so we have more job opportunities and more productive efficiency and allocative efficiency as a consequence. So what does that look like on the model then? Well, in the model, because we're talking about a positive production externality, the social costs, because we're talking about positive production externality, we're looking at the supply line. We're looking at the perspective of the producer. And the producer, Ford in this case, Henry Ford, has to incur the cost of producing all those Ford vehicles. But what is the benefit to society of this production process? It's the development of skill and knowledge of the laborers who can then use that skill and knowledge to leave the Ford Motor Company, branch off on their own, and start their own automotive businesses or mechanic shops or things like this. So as a consequence, what we're going to see here is that while the cost, the marginal private cost for producing Ford Motor vehicles is incurred by the individual private entrepreneur, Henry Ford, you'll see that there are going to be the marginal social costs of this is going to be much lower, because to society, well, when Ford hires labor, when Ford buys steel to produce his cars, he has to pay money to do those things. Those are his private costs. But those costs to him, the individual, is going to be much less than it is to society as people develop more skill, as the laborers under Ford develop more skill and then leave Ford and then branch out and create their own businesses and create more market activity and create more productive efficiency throughout the market. And so we can see how the social costs of the positive production externality is less than the private costs. Why? Because of the benefit that is given to society. All right, so what does this mean? This means then that the original quantity is actually the quantity being produced in the market. This is the quantity of cars being produced in the market, and this is the price of those cars in the market. But because of the spillover benefits that the producers are providing to society, is represented by marginal social cost, we see that we would need more industrial mass production to meet the socially optimal level of industrial output. The more industrial mass production we have, the more labor we need to work in those machines, and then therefore the more skill those laborers will develop, and therefore those laborers will be more able to branch off and start their own businesses and be more equipped to pursue their self-interest. All right? So as a consequence also, the optimal price for those cars will fall from P to P opt, so as to encourage more people to enter and participate in the market. So there it is. But what is our spillover? Where's our deadweight loss triangle? How do we show the deadweight loss triangle here? The deadweight loss triangle, again, we go from the new intersection up to the original line. And there it is. This triangle shows us the benefit that society is not experiencing, or the lowered social cost that society is not experiencing as a consequence of not having more mass industrial produced automotive vehicles. Well, how can we change, how can the government step in, how can we implement a policy to incentivize more production of automotive vehicles? We could cut taxes, if you remember back to our previous unit. By cutting taxes, what we do is we allow the firm to have more revenue that they can then invest in their production. It expands their production possibilities, so to speak. And so what does that look like in this model? Well, by cutting taxes, you can increase the supply minus the tax. And so as a consequence, the loss of social benefit, or the loss of diminished social cost, is minimized from the original triangle to this triangle. And we get closer to the socially optimal output of automotive vehicles with QT, for Q minus the tax. And the same with the price, P minus the tax. All right? So I hope this makes sense with production possibilities. I know I put it in a very specific example with Ford Automotives, but you can think about how education through on-the-job training and on-the-job experience, by working and being productive, you develop skills that can better equip you to pursue your self-interest as you age and move throughout your life. So we'll discuss more policies that we can use to correct for positive production externalities, and we'll discuss other examples in class. So we're going to pause it right here, and then we're going to pick up in another video for the positive consumption externalities. See you in a bit.